Welcome to the Subaru Gears instructional video on how to shorten Subaru center differential housings for nose cones. First of all, get yourself a nice, clean, solid workbench. Get your hands on your center differential housing after it's been removed from your transmission, and here are the tools that I usually use to shorten mine. A good marker, good measuring tape, some clamps to hold it onto the bench with. I use a 9-inch angle grinder for making the large cuts because it cuts straight through without any problems, but you can also use the 4-inch angle grinder. I use a nice thin grinding disc because it cuts through aluminium very well. You can also use the 4-inch. This has the thin cutting disc. I also use a thicker grinding disc for later on when I'm trying to smooth down the edges and so on, and for final polishing of the finished product use a flap disc to get a really good finish. These are basically the parts that we need to use. First thing that we need to do is understand what to do and where to cut on the center differential housing. If you look at the housing, this is the left hand side, this is the end where the center differential usually sits, the right hand side and the face. Now this bolts onto the rest of the transmission. What we want to do is we want to keep all this intact. We want to remove this portion where the center differential usually sits. However, we want to retain this transmission shaft housing for the shift shaft. If you cut this off, you'll have no support for the shift shaft, and it's very important that all of this stays the same. Before you start any work on it, take out this seal, because once you do some cutting and welding and heating up, this seal will need to be replaced anyway. So remove this seal with a screwdriver. It's very simple to pull this out and replace. So let's work out where we want to mark our lines and cut our transmission housing. You can see that we basically want to cut up to this edge and remove all this material. So take a measurement, 10 centimeters all the way around. That's how we want to do it. You can pretty much see where that line goes all the way around the edge of that casting, but it's very smart to measure 10 centimeters and mark it all out. It's also very important that this area here retained exactly the same, and mark around this area here so you know to retain this and not cut through this. It's very important that this spring and ball and bolt stays in place for the reverse lockout mechanism, and that this all stays in place for your shift shaft. So let's mark it all out. Okay, let's start marking it out. The most obvious place to start is where you know that you need to keep material. You need to keep this material here. So just mark through that. Mark through this area. Right down, you can see where the casting goes. I always leave a little bit extra so I know where I'm going, and I can always grind that off a bit more later on. Go through here, keep these mounts in place because these are your mounts for mounting the transmission. Cut through here. You can see this is where the casting is, so just give it a little bit more room. Mark through here. Again, this mount needs to be kept in place, so just mark through here. You're going to cut through here. Now this is where it starts to get tricky. You have to remember to keep this. So I always mark like this through here, so I know to be careful. Be very careful through here. Mark back up and into here. And that's pretty much your marking done. If you want to, you can put big X's here so you know not to cut through. Big X's here so you know not to cut through. Just take your time. So now we've completed the rough cut. You can see where all the material has been removed. This is the basic shape that we'll need to be able to convert this nose. This metal Welch plug can just be taken out with a screwdriver. And this will now reveal the hole that needs to be tigged up. We usually tig a plate over here and tig a plate here and fit the super plug in here. That will complete this. Here you can see what we've done with the completed grinding. This is just with the 4-inch grinder to get the shape pretty close to correct. We've certainly taken a lot off here. You could continue to take more material off here. It just depends how necessary it is. Here's one where you want to take most material off, because this is where you're closest to your torsion bar. Note that we've made sure we've kept this surface here untouched. Now polished the piece with a flap wheel, and you can see it's smoothed off all the edges. Got it nice and flat. All the surfaces are prepped. This is now ready for finishing.